Thank you for clapping and breaking the tension. It seemed so somber as everybody walked up here. My name is Michelle Shepard. I'm a journalist and filmmaker and co-president of the Canadian Journalists for Free Expression. And thank you, thank you so much for coming tonight. I know it's difficult to get out sometimes on weeknights, and we really appreciate this crowd for what has turned into an incredibly topical conversation at a perfect time. I'm going to be very quick because, as you can see, we have a powerhouse of panelists up here, and our time will go very quickly. I just wanted to thank first Hot Docs for being so wonderful, Alicia for helping organize this event. And I believe it's next Tuesday, the press conference for the festival. It's going to be an amazing festival this year, so please get your tickets and come out and support this amazing theater. I also would like to thank FIMS. That's the Western's Faculty of Information Media Studies, and in particular, Dean Lisa Henderson, who is here. Thank you. It is because of their support that we're able to put this on today, and as Lisa said, this is a very important time to support journalism, never a more important time. So thank you again, and welcome to all the students who are here from Western, all the journalism students. We also have students here from Rosedale High School who run the newspaper, so welcome to you guys as well. And lastly, for those who don't know, Canadian Journalists for Free Expression, we're Canada's oldest free press organization. We've been a charity that have been around for 40 years now, and we really appreciate your support. Please keep supporting us. As I keep saying, there's never been a more important time where we feel that journalists are under threat. Without further ado, in this time, as the saying goes, where democracy dies in darkness, we are in a very, very dark time. And I want to introduce our moderator for tonight, the most incredible Carol Off, also my co-president at CJFE. And Carol obviously needs no introduction, but she remains on the bestseller list with her book, At a Loss for Words, which is so funny because, first of all, it's an incredible book, but Carol Off is never at a loss for words. So please welcome Carol Off, and she will introduce our panelists. Thanks.
Hello, hello. So I thought that you were applauding for us when we came up because you thought we got up here without falling off, which still might happen, okay? And so and you can laugh because it's not part of the act if we do fall off, just so you know. But thanks, Michelle. Thank you, Lisa. And Joanne, thank you so much for everything you did to get us here tonight. I'm going to introduce, as you know, this is, well, the old ancient saying, may you live in interesting times. It's a curse, actually. And we are living in interesting times, so I'm really glad we could get this panel here. And of course, we planned the election call on Sunday, so it would work with this. Hope you guys are cool with that. Anyway, I'm going to introduce everybody. On the far end, Luc LeBrun, editor of Press Progress. Nicole MacIntyre, editor-in-chief of the Toronto Star. Ian Bailey, Ottawa Press Gallery reporter for the Globe and Mail. Matina Stevis-Gridneff, Canadian bureau chief for the New York Times. Justin Ling, investigative journalist. And Brodie Fenlon, general manager, editor-in-chief for CBC News. So because there's really nothing going on, we're going to talk about those amazing astronauts that got. I mean, wasn't that an amazing? That's because I can't imagine what else we could talk about tonight. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start off with a brief question for each panelist so you get a sense of where they're coming from, because I think that's important these days. And then we're going to break into three areas of conversation, and I'll tell you about that when we get there. I'm going to start for no particular reason with Justin, and I'm just, you know what, I'm going to read something that I just printed out that you wrote that I just kind of summed up the moment, as you so often do, Justin. Justin wrote, Canada has a housing crisis, a healthcare shortage, a productivity problem, a delivery problem. There is a land war in Europe, a fragile peace in the Middle East, the looming possibility of invasion in Taiwan, and a decline of the liberal world order. Added to this, climate change is threatening to make the planet unlivable. And he said, and by the way, the neighbor to the south keeps threatening to annex us, which I think has been upgraded to invade at this point, hasn't it?
There's no longer peace in the Middle East, so.
Yeah, and there's no longer peace in the Middle East, so that's kind of dated. Of course, it's easy to get your stuff dated these days, isn't it? How are you going to cover this election that's coming, Justin?
I don't know if you have any ideas. I'm all ears. This is going to be one of the most exceptional and exceptionally weird campaigns in Canadian history, if not the most. We don't really have a playbook for this, right? I was talking to an American editor today, and I said, we're running into an election campaign. He goes, oh, God, it's going to be so stressful. And I said, at least it's only going to be 35 days. And he goes, I've never been so jealous of anybody in my entire life. But it's going to be the weirdest, quickest, most intense month I think we've seen in Canadian news in quite some time. And it's not just that we are facing one of the most challenging moments in our history in global security and geopolitics. It's not just that we're sitting next to, a mercurial, unpredictable bear of a nation. No. But it's also that we don't know what the actual campaign is going to look like. I mean, we have a leader of the opposition who doesn't want media around him at all. We have a brand new prime minister who has never held elected office before, and we don't really know what his style of governance is. We have a billionaire who runs one of the largest media platforms in the world who continues interfering in the elections of any country that he deigns to meddle in. And we have a president who is completely unshackled by kind of the mores of the liberal order. Maybe it'll be fine. I mean, we don't know, and this is it. So we're sort of preparing for a regular campaign, but anticipating one that will be anything but normal.
Okay, that's a good start.
I'm very fun at parties.
I'm going to turn things over to Nicole MacIntyre, and has it been a year yet that you've been in this job? It's been about 9 months, I guess. Eh?
You're on.
Am I on?
Yeah.
Am I good?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, no, just it's been about 9 months you've been in the
About
job?
9 months, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Long enough to do lots of things, like give birth. But you said at the beginning that you wanted the Star to be ambitious and fearless.
Yeah.
What does that look like come this Sunday?
It's a good question. I would say that I think we have to choose to cover this election as we think the public wants it, not how the politicians want it told. And some of the decisions that are already being made by those politicians, they very much want to control the narrative. And they're getting very testy when they feel like they can't. We have to be committed to telling that, we have to be willing to put the resources in. We have to be willing to go against the narrative and actually tell the stories that people want. Like, I think that that's what being fearless means. And it also means really committing to not being partisan in the way that we cover it, that building that public trust of showing that we're not going to allow our frustrations about how these politicians are treating the media to impact our coverage of them. So I think that's a way that we're going to have to be fearless, and that's going to be hard. It is hard not to be frustrated by the way we're treated, but our readers and the public need us to put that aside.
When you say that you have to do the narrative that people would like you to have and not the one that's perhaps driven by how we see things, what do you mean by that?
I think that politicians may believe that they're reflecting the things that are most concerning people, but I think they rarely do. And we often allow what politicians give speeches about to be the stories that run on the front page, that lead the news. It's our job to make sure that politicians are actually speaking to the things that are most upsetting people. And I would also say that in these polarized times, I think we would find that people on either side actually have a lot of shared concerns about what's happening in their lives, and it's our responsibility to actually bring people together by reflecting those common concerns.
We agree, right? There you go. Good, thank you. Yeah, Ian, I was scrolling through your coverage on Politics Insider on the Globe and Mail since January. I just that's 3 months. It's not a long period of time. It's just extraordinary when you do a headline every couple of days like that to see how much has changed in how much ground has been covered between January and now. And so, what are you preparing for at this point?
It's amazing, Mark Carney has come out of nowhere to be the prime minister, a guy who, has accomplished a lot of things professionally, but has no political, as we've said, elected political experience. And so in sort of, I'm losing track of the calendar, in like less than 2 weeks, he will be going into his first campaign. I've been covering provincial campaigns in Newfoundland and British Columbia. I've covered one or two national campaigns, and campaigning takes a particular set of muscles. It takes a particular set of skills. It takes a kind of discipline, repeating a message. It takes an ability to react to sort of the unexpected. And in a country as large as Canada, it takes a durability to deal with time zone differences and travel. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because Mr. Carney doesn't have this kind of experience. Mr. Poilievre has been leader for some time. And, when you look at his record, he has traveled a great deal. He has honed a message. He knows he's like an athlete who's sort of prepared for this. I was talking to a conservative earlier today, and he was basically, we were talking about the changing situation, and he was saying they prepared for women. We know this. They prepared for one campaign, and they are now in the midst of a kind of tumultuous, it's like writing a musical as you're coming up on the stage to perform it, because like everything has changed, but the campaign is coming, and the leader will be on the campaign trail in less than a week. So it's a total sort of, and of course, Donald Trump has come in, and, we talk about foreign interference, and, there are, powers in other nations that, we know those nations that those who study this have warned us about, but, the most significant foreign interference may be from the Oval Office and the election that comes starting next week, and not just from the president, but from Musk, associates of the president. I mean, I've been covering politics, interested in politics from presidents back to Jimmy Carter, and I can't recall a president intervening in a Canadian election in this way, whether Democratic or Republican. So that I think is going to be one of the many changes. And of course, we can talk about it later, I guess, but Mr. Poilievre's decision not to allow the media on the campaign trail, even though he's not from a fourth party, he has a good shot at being the prime minister. So we'll have to see how that plays out. That is going to be an interesting challenge for the media.
Are you kind of intimidated by it? Are you keen? Is it going to be fun? Is it going to be? How would you characterize? If there's a word you could characterize what this next stretch looks like to you?
It looks chaotic, but I can only I'm not a Globe and Mail editor, but I think it would be fair to say, for our news organization, we'll rise to the challenge, and our readers expect to know what's going on, and it's in the way that the Globe covers politics, and I think I can say fairly certainly, I know I can say fairly certainly, that despite this hurdle, readers will get that coverage. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of United States and Donald Trump, Matina, I'm looking at this big, huge thing above us. Carol. Yeah, what does it say? Canadian politics in the eye of the storm, and if there's anybody in the eye of the storm, Matina, it has to be you, right? Being in you've past 3 months, your coverage in Coutts, Alberta was astonishing. That was a story that needed to be told. You got there, and both sides of the border, people were fascinated with what you could do. But I just wonder, do you feel that you need to explain Americans to Canadians, or explain Canadians to Americans?
That's a really good question, and thank you. And just to be a total editor about this, it is really calm in the eye of the storm. This is in the I did my training at The Economist, and it's in their handbook. Like, never say in the eye of the storm, because it's actually super calm. It's like you just step out of it and it's total chaos.
It's in their handbook, okay.
Yeah. I've got more where that came from if you're interested. Catch me afterwards. Just to take a step back, I am a career foreign correspondent. I come from a small Southern European country. I have never lived in the United States, although I have spent most of my professional career working for American publications, first the Wall Street Journal for about 9 years, and now the Times for 6. And I have covered Europe and Africa for most of my career, and so this is a very new thing for me. I got here 6 months ago. And my arrival has nothing to do with what's happening, just to be very clear. But I don't America explain, and I don't posting explain anything. I come from a fundamental belief that humans behave in really similar manners everywhere, and that institutions shape outcomes to a great degree. I come from a place of curiosity, and that is the driving force of how I try to do my journalism. And my editor was very upset that I didn't understand the importance of Gretzky, and I couldn't do the Gretzky story, and they sent someone from the US to do it. But I like to say, I always joke, like, I don't have a North American brain, so I'm learning, I'm learning, and I'm making mistakes, and people are being patient with that. But I think what Nicole said really resonated with me. I think we need to get out of this sort of American exceptionalism brain. I'm so glad I don't have it. No offense to people who do. I'm sure they're wonderful and good professionals, but I'm so happy not to be burdened by that gaze on the world. And I think that fundamentally we need to approach every subject we cover and every individual in any country, and I happen to be extremely fortunate to be in this country right now, and it's a huge honor, through the fundamentals of the human condition. People care about the same things everywhere, and they face very similar challenges across the board, and that needs to be the driving force of our journalism. And I try to remind myself that every day.
And just briefly, often it's said that people, outsiders, a foreign correspondent or someone from the outside, sees a country in the way the country can't see it itself.
Sure, and it's not always pretty, right? So people... I got in a disagreement early on, and I get in disagreements a lot. So it was nothing exceptional. But I got in a disagreement. Someone was like, "What do you think you're doing here?" By the way, our team is we have 4 staff correspondents in the country. 3 of them are Canadians, and they're all exceptional. So I'm the only kind of foreigner. But he was like, "What do you think you can do here that we can't do for ourselves?" And I sort of. I think my skill set and everyone's skill set goes well beyond their passport, actually. And this city and this country is testament to that. But I also think that, yes, having an external sort of gaze, like bringing different experiences, does help with some things. It also is a problem. Like, there's a lot of stuff I don't know that my colleagues know. Yeah, exactly. And I rely on my colleagues to catch me, and sometimes they don't. And there's corrections, because we have a very robust correction policy, and it's very humbling. And so having to learn a new beat in such an intense moment with such scrutiny is also a challenge. Not complaining; it's a huge honor. But yeah, the external, I don't know, being an outsider helps to a certain degree. I just want to say that, like, it helps not to have a horse in the race, but we all have skin in this game. And also, I would like to point out, I pay taxes here, so I am, even though I don't get to vote, I'm definitely, definitely invested.
And Gretzky is persona non grata in Canada anyway, so it doesn't really matter to know who he is. Brodie, I'm going to have to ask you a question I know you're anticipating, and you've been looking at my page, so you know I'm going to ask you.
I have not looked.
You have? I know, I got you. I saw you. But this is an election that includes, in no small way, the consequences for the CBC as we know it. And so how do you cover your own story?
Yeah. Somebody said to me, what will it be like to cover your own murder? But joking aside, we'll just cover it. And we will have to be open and honest about the inherent self-conflict. CBC News reports on the CBC often. I know you've done stories about your employer. There is a way to do it, and it's not easy. but you go back to core principles around impartiality, fairness, accuracy, balance. And the thing I've been saying to our staff is treat it like any other Crown corporation that is the subject of a policy platform, and let's surface all of the perspectives. It's a fair policy question too. Should there be a public broadcaster? Is it worthwhile? Is it needed at this? Well, that is its mandate accurate, and does it need to change? It's all fair game, and but I admit it's going to be it's challenging because of course you have to find a way as a journalist to take everything you know and use that to inform your journalism, but also start the day with a blank notebook, to paraphrase. I think it was someone from the New York Times who said that. And so that's the trick.
Yeah. Every place I've been in this country on book tour, the questions are overwhelmingly about the CBC and what its future is, and deep concerns. That not just the CBC, but generally that we're about to lose. There are news deserts across the countries. You know, we'll talk a bit more about this later, but to lose the CBC for so many people is to lose the last bit of connection with each other that they have. You know that?
Well, it's interesting. I've sensed a change in the whole conversation, to be honest. This has been in the air for it's been ever since before the leadership race for the Conservatives. This has been a stump speech for Poilievre for more than a year. There were many people who would say to me, but this is not really going to do that. But now I think people are reevaluating everything. What does it mean to be Canadian? What are Canadian institutions? I was showing a picture of a grocery store where all the American produce was left and all the Canadian produce gone. So I think the debate has somewhat changed, but it's a real issue, and we'll have to cover it. And we'll have to cover it, though, in relation to all the other bigger stories that matter to people. I mean, this is the other trick. You have to get perspective right and balance right in terms of what is the public interest in this story versus some of these major issues we're dealing with, including, overt threats to our sovereignty.
How CBC is an issue? How important is it to you? We needed that. Luke, we keep talking about this, people keep talking about how this is an election of huge consequences, that there's just a feeling this is, some others have mentioned, this is something much bigger than we have seen, I don't know, I can't, in memory. And I just, so it feels, it's an existential crisis, isn't it? So how do you serve Canadians? How do you do this story at a time when people want it in a different way? We're not going to just be able to, what's happened today? What happened yesterday at that press conference? People want it in a much deeper way, don't they?
Yeah, just to begin, just the other day I was in a restaurant, as we were talking earlier, and there were about 5 different conversations that I overheard where everyone was talking about Canada, U.S. politics, and I can't think of another time in my lifetime where I've seen people it just seems like everyone is really tuned into this one issue, and I've never really quite seen it. I was saying before, I think maybe the closest historical parallel was maybe the Quebec referendum in 1995, but in my lifetime, that's probably the closest thing I can compare it to. To your question, so my organization, Press Progress, a little bit different from some of the other organizations here. We tend to focus more on investigative reporting. We're a small nonprofit, 5 journalists. We really prioritize stories that are being underreported. We have a couple of different issue areas that we really prioritize, so things like social and economic inequality, labor reporting, big business, right-wing politics, and that kind of stuff. And so we just look for stories that are kind of in those issue areas and that aren't being reported elsewhere. So it does, during an election campaign, we kind of approach it a little bit differently from maybe other organizations that are sending correspondence to campaign events or, traveling with the candidates and things like that. So, in this election, obviously we're going to be looking for, those kind of traditional campaign stories, candidates with extreme views or, gaffes on the campaign trail, that kind of a thing. We're also going to be quite focused on, labor issues. So obviously there's a lot of workers in Canada right now who feel like they're in a really precarious place. They feel like they might lose their jobs. Their communities might get decimated as a result of those jobs disappearing. And so there's going to be a lot of issues surrounding that and how best to protect those workers, for example. So those are the kinds of things that I think we'll be looking at. I mean, we kind of have them. This is all just kind of a way of saying that we have a bit of a mission-based kind of editorial focus.
I'm going to go through 3 different areas we're going to talk about over the next 45 minutes or so, and the 3 sections I'd like to address are the Trump effect in this election campaign. Then we'll talk about the disinformation threat that we're faced with, and mis and disinformation that we are confronted with, not just from the United States or internally, but from foreign actors like the Kremlin and China. And then thirdly, I think maybe the most important for many of you here is to talk about what they call the trust deficit, and the issue that we're dealing with as journalists, that people don't know who they can trust, and they don't know what to believe. They don't know what's true, what's real, what's fake. It's a real issue for many people, especially when we're going to have a very short period of time to try and make sense of this election campaign, when we can't tell what's real and what's not real, and what's and trying to understand who we can trust in the middle of all this. So when I'll ask some general questions, but can you just indicate to me just finger up if you want to jump in, and I'll make sure that everyone gets a chance to if they have got something to say on these things. Some people have more expertise in some of these areas than others, but I'm just going to start with Brodie on this, because as you mentioned, Canada is already dealing with so many of these issues that the Trump effect is going to have. But there's so many other things, as Justin was talking about, all these other crises. Do you think that Donald Trump and the tariffs are going to sort of suck up all the oxygen in this election?
Yes, probably. I see the Trump effect is having impact in all kinds of ways. First, the interest in the story is incredible, and heartening, actually, to see huge audiences coming back to us old mainstream media. So we at CBC are seeing banner audiences on everything, on radio, television, digital. So there's something there that is heartening, that people are looking for trusted news and information, and they're choosing some of these places. There's also incredible and intense emotion within the audience. And there's a double-edged sword to that. So the interest is high. The tolerance for anything that might raise questions or sound, not patriotic, for example, or might be giving legitimacy to something that Trump or a Trump acolyte says, there's very little tolerance for that. And
on both sides.
On all sides, yes. And so then you get into this weird spot where sometimes the act of asking a question or tabling an idea is almost seen as a hostile act. And I'm receiving many, many complaints, sometimes about simple, basic things around free speech and the act of journalism. Why would you ask that question? Why would you platform that perspective? How dare you carry this person live? They should be fired. So I see a somewhat alarming sort of pull to quashing some of the journalism, because it is so alarming and people are in such a sort of tense, fraught state. Because I really do think a lot of Canadians are genuinely concerned and feel a lot of fear and anxiety about what's happening, and so that's what I've been witnessing in the last few weeks. I'm curious if my colleagues have experienced that.
Well, I'd throw something in. I mean, this, we were talking earlier about how distinct this election is, and one other distinct aspect is we are going into an election in the midst of a trade war, in the midst of an unresolved crisis between these two countries that is basically unprecedented. So we're going to have, the passion and the concern and the fear that Brodie, we've all been talking about, but we also have this unresolved situation. We have the hostility of the President of the United States. And, imagine if there was no trade war, but Trump was just there being Trump. I am sure he would still intervene. So I think that's going to be another really hugely complicating factor here. I mean, Mr. Carney is the Liberal leader, properly phrased in newspaper copy when the election begins, but he's still the Prime Minister. And I guess in a way, much like Doug Ford was going to Washington during the provincial election, we're going to have an election and the conflict between these parties, but also this crisis going on. So it's just part of this mix of chaos that we're looking at in the coming weeks.
Just a couple of specific thoughts on the question of interest and just the overall heightened emotional state of everyone who's coming to us to read our stories. One of the observations from my coverage, our coverage at the Times, is we're also seeing a lot of I would describe them as broadly, maybe they're Democrats or maybe they're centrists or maybe they're repentant Republicans, I don't know, but like people who don't like Trump coming to Canada coverage to sort of be part of this moment as the Canada situation proves them that they are right to not be happy with the president. And so I feel like some of the interest in the Canada story internationally is amplified by Canada's unique relationship with the United States. And this idea of like, well, if this is happening to Canadians, if this is happening to Canada, even Canadians are up in arms. And I think that just like supercharges interest. I'm sure that we have a lot of Canadian readers and who are driving our readership, but I believe strongly that there's a lot of groups that are finding reflection and interest in Canada coverage in this moment. And it just completely changes the dynamic of the coverage and how people engage with it.
Justin?
Yeah, let me underline something, picking up on something Brodie said. I think there is an instinct by Canadians right now to see an action in DC and to sort of enact the opposite reaction, right? They see Donald Trump pursue this America First policy that jacks up tariffs and ends foreign aid and basically becomes a troll for the rest of the world. I think there's this instinct, and I've seen it, you've heard it in the emails you get from readers, to do almost the same thing. Buy Canadian and only Canadian. Rip up our deals, leave NATO, end NAFTA, leave basically to essentially mimic what Donald Trump has done. And I understand that instinct, but I actually think it's incumbent on us as journalists to help elucidate to people why that approach has risks, and actually to go above and beyond it and to say the world has, in the manner of 2 months, become fundamentally more unpredictable, less secure, less safe, more violent, more dangerous, less rich, and in desperate need of leadership. Canada will not be the new world cop. It's not going to happen. We're not going to become the world's superpower. Unfortunately, we can try if you'd like, but it's not going to happen. But I think it's an invitation for Canada to help reform an international security alliance. Now, this is a hard thing to explain in the course of a leadership campaign, but it's going to require journalists asking our leaders to understand and explain that and to give us a detailed plan for how they intend on approaching a world on fire. I mean, in our own hemisphere, Haiti has become functionally a failed state, right? We are seeing a continued migrant crisis in the south. We are seeing an insurgency that is basically wrecking the entire of the Sahel and West Africa. We are seeing Russia and China turn much of Africa and the global south into client states through their debt trap diplomacy. We are seeing continued war in Ukraine, right? We are seeing a threat of invasion of Taiwan. America does not care about those problems anymore, right? Like, that's the basic reality. Because America does not care, because America has pulled out the legs of the stool that is trying to keep the world security order together, because they've done that, the risk of a calamitous and disastrous response or result on multiple fronts is incredibly likely. Canada, as one of the world's richest nations, has a moral and self-interested responsibility to address that. And I don't hear any of our politicians talking about it. And in fact, I hear our politicians leaning in to that kind of Canada first. I mean, one of them keeps saying it. That Canada first mentality that sort of ignores the rest of the world. And I think that is irresponsible. And I think it's our job as journalists to help underscore that threat and to help provide some solutions.
Okay, so yes. Okay. You are a fun party boy, aren't you there, Justin?
I need a drink.
But if you... Okay, you're talking about, to some degree, from the same point of view of how we have always covered things, which you have to see both sides. If you try and project it with another point of view, it's now looked at as being giving them a platform. You can't allow that. You can't. Nobody wants to hear the other side because and so when we're stuck, and I have to say, as a profession, kind of still stuck in that both sides-ism, where everything has to be equivocated. Everything is like, well, we have got this, we got that. Can we afford to do that at this point? Is it this changed in a way with the amount of passion and fear and genuine fear? Because when we talk about the 51st state, as many of you are looking at, he's not going to make the 51st state. People are talking about he's not going to annex Canada. He's going to invade. That's what people now fear. They fear a violent military invasion of this country. This is huge. So how do you return just to sort of business as usual and tell the story from both sides? And I'll turn this to Nicole because I think this is an important thing that Toronto Star's got to do.
I think that has been an important change in journalism, that we have acknowledged that we can't just tell the both sides always. I do think sometimes we've taken that too far, though, and not acknowledged another side. And one of the things I think is important is that we should think, what would a reasonable person see as something that we should be discussing here? And I think part of the reason that we lost some public trust is, in fact, that we maybe didn't acknowledge other sides of a story, that a reasonable person would think we're worthy of being included. So even though we may get hate mail, I think it's important that we actually do raise those things in a story. I want to jump on something. I, years ago, sat in this very theater and listened to Marty Barron talk about what it was like to cover Trump in his first term. And I will never forget that he said the challenge for them was not to cover Trump, it was that the newsroom forgot everything else they were supposed to do. Because he takes everything. And I try to remember that in this election as well, is that we have to be careful that this doesn't become the only thing that we're doing. We can't have newsrooms where everyone is focused on Trump. We have to cover all the other things that are important. It also reminds me of the beginning of COVID, where we're also seeing record audiences right now, like we did at the beginning of COVID, and people couldn't get enough. That does change. There's a huge responsibility that comes with this moment. But we have to make sure that we're covering all those other stories too, and that Donald Trump isn't the only headline that's happening in Canada.
And that not everything is Trump-lensed. It's important that not all the issues on the table are Trump-lensed. It's like not everything is linked to Trump. And so we can't apply the same lens to all the issues. There are some issues that are just about Canadians. And, you know, there can't be a Trump angle in everything. Mm-hmm.
You know, I think that, I have no polling to back this up or anything, but I suspect that in due course, the affordability issue, the housing issue are going to come back, or rightly so. You know, the issues of young Canadians unable to afford, you know, access to the housing market. This is going to come back into the discussion. I think Trump will be there, will be loud, but this is going to come back into this campaign. And, you know, Mr. Polyev, Mr. Carney, Mr. Singh, you know, Mr. Blanchette to a degree, and Miss Murphy, Miss May, sorry, will be dealing with that issue in the weeks ahead, or that series of issues.
And I think at this moment in time, still most Canadians will say, the first thing I care about is Canada. And I can't even engage with other policy issues when I think that the country and my livelihood, which is an economic thing, it's going to be seen through a Trump lens regardless, is at risk. My entire well-being is under threat. So it's going to be a really hard challenge to get the balance right. And then, of course, the White House is a chaos kind of machine right now that is just churning out, maybe deliberately, craziness, and so it's hard to get that balance right. But we don't want to be the Trump network either, and this is a Canadian election, and so like others on the stage, we will spend a lot of time listening to people across the country, finding out what do they really care about, and using that to inform the journalism.
I was just going to add, you know, I think it's interesting how the Trump effect will trickle down into different policy areas and might lead to some kind of interesting stories. And I have specifically in mind that case of the woman who was detained by ICE for 2 weeks. You know, like it'll be interesting to see stories like that pop up where you see the effects of Trump's policy choices, maybe giving it a lot of credit, but you know, like how that will trickle down and how that will affect ordinary Canadians, and then lead to you know, very compelling personal stories. In the case of that, the woman whose name escapes me now, but who was detained by ICE in Arizona and San Diego.
I think Matina would do it.
Oh, okay. I'll try to keep it relatively brief. Listen, I think there is a bit of a thing that irks me, which is that when we talk about this need to, you know, figure out what objectivity are both sides, or kind of figure out how to recalibrate our kind of political coverage, it bugs me because that's not the problem we're really facing, right? The problem we're really facing is not that we've lost objectivity in covering partisans and political leaders. I mean, we can debate about the right calibration of that, but I don't think that's what's actually alienating people. One of the biggest problems, not a choice we made, is that political journalism used to be half about covering the machinery of government and half about covering the political arena, right? And the machinery of government, these things were codependent, right? We needed to understand how government worked and how it wasn't working in order to adequately cover our politicians and how they wanted to fix those things. The problem is doing both is really expensive. And what happened to the media over the last 20 years? We lost all of our money. So what did we do? We went for the cheaper thing. And the cheaper thing is covering politics. And the hard, expensive thing is covering the machinery of government. What people miss these days, what they don't even know they're missing, is good coverage about the machinery of government. Why is it that we don't have enough homes in this country? Why is it that the Prime Minister promised to build hundreds of thousands of new homes, spend billions, tens of billions of dollars on it, and managed to build about 30,000 across the country over a decade, right? Why don't we have an answer to that? Like, that is the sort of machinery of government coverage that people want, that they don't know they miss, and that is true whether it's healthcare, whether it's immigration, whether it's the federal bureaucracy, right? On all of these fronts, we've gotten really, really bad. Not our fault. Like, we lost all of our money. Again, I can't underscore that enough. But we got really bad at covering those things. And it is hurting our political coverage. It's hurting the faith from the public. And it's hurting our ability to understand why things aren't working.
Matina, I'll go to you. Matina, yes, thank you. And then we'll turn to another topic.
It's going to be a hard pivot from that. Sorry. No, all I was going to say is just to continue a little bit on the you know, the Trump angle on this election, is that as our readers are capable of holding multiple thoughts at once, so must we, and we must do multiple things at once and understand that it's not all blue today and tomorrow it's all red, and like we have to do all of it. And if we don't, out of being understaffed or exhausted, unfortunately, I don't want to jump to the last bit of the panel, it will harm trust because people will read adverse motives into that.
Occurs that one person very happy that Donald Trump is dominating the Canadian election is probably Donald Trump.
Yeah, well, that's when you're a narcissist. Like, did I just say that? Yeah, but I think that's what we're starting to conclude, that he just gets a rise out of this. But it doesn't mean he's not going to do the stuff he's saying, right? I want to go turn to disinformation. And there are a couple of people on the panel I know who have more experience with this, like on the ground, and particularly Luke, because disinformation is going to be a huge issue in this election, right? And I know there were some indictments in the United States of media and influencers who were financed by the Kremlin. You connected them to some players in Canada. we can see, of course, because there's no borders when it comes to this kind of stuff. So what do you fear the most? What are you looking at? And maybe just give us what you've discovered about what we're up against with that kind of disinformation.
Sure. I guess the way I would approach this question, I'm increasingly feeling like we need to put more attention on the platforms themselves and understanding how those platforms are operating, because you can have any number of bad actors, foreign or domestic or whatever, but at the end of the day, the people who are enabling them are the platforms such as, Meta, and I mean, Elon Musk's X is currently under investigation in the European Union by regulators and prosecutors, I think in France as well. They're looking into whether or not he is manipulating the algorithms of X to boost far-right messages. So yeah, I don't know. It's a big question. In terms of, I mean, I don't think we should go too overboard with worrying about foreign interference. That's not to say that it's not real. As we saw with the Tenet Media case, I mean, there are clear examples of, in that case, there was a Canadian who was receiving money from RT, the Russian state broadcaster, to produce far-right content, allegedly, right? Thank you, Jonathan. So that's a real example. My colleague, Ramneek Johal at Press Progress, she does a lot of reporting on how the South Asian diaspora community is targeted by accounts that are supportive of Narendra Modi in India, for example. A lot of this stuff came out in the Foreign Interference Inquiry. But that being said, I mean, so these are real things that are out there and we should be cognizant of them. But, there's a lot of domestic actors that are putting out disinformation and what have you. Just today, I did a story about the conservative group Canada Proud, who's been running ads basically linking Mark Carney to Jeffrey Epstein based on very tenuous...
These doctored photos indicating that, AI photos.
Well, it's convoluted, but there is one real photo of Mark Carney standing next to Ghislaine Maxwell at a public event. Doesn't actually implicate anything other than just that he happened to be in the same spot one day 2 years before any allegations about her actually surfaced. And then there's like generative AI images. So this was the doctored image that you're referring to, where they were placing Mark Carney and Tom Hanks, of all people, on Epstein Island. And people believe it. There are people out there who believe it. I mean, maybe 90% of people who saw that realized it was AI, but there are a significant number of people who believed it.
Worst Castaway sequel ever.
Yeah. Mark Carney at the soccer ball and Tom Hanks. Anyways, so I'm keeping an eye out for things like that. And I think it is significant that an organization like Canada Proud, so just from looking at Meta's Facebook ad library, they spent $15,000 over the last 3 or 4 or 5 days. They've reached about 2 million people with these about 10 different ads that have basically making these tenuous links between Carney and Epstein. So yeah, I'm keeping an eye on those kinds of things as well as those foreign actors.
But that particular photo that with the Epstein Island, the Tom Hanks one, is just so obvious that it's easier to point that out. But it's a lot of AI. In fact, we now know that we're days away, minutes away from AI being, for the most part, impossible to determine. That we will not be able to tell. We already don't know how to tell. I mean, I know some about it. Justin, you've been involved in some of this, trying to make sense of the AI
not
issue.
creating AI deepfakes.
Oh,
there,
okay.
No, covering it. I mean, listen. Okay, so I've developed a heretical view of this topic. And I actually agree with Luke on a couple of those things. I've covered disinformation, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and extremism for as long as we've been using those words in the modern context. I've covered foreign interference in kind of all its forms. I wrote a report last year about the nature of political polarization in Canada for the Public Policy Forum. So I feel like I've been obsessed with this topic for a while. But there's a couple of things that I think a couple of conclusions I've come to. One is that foreign interference, at least on a grand scale and a population level, doesn't really work. right? It doesn't. We have good longitudinal studies of this in the States about the Russian interference efforts in 2016. We can say pretty conclusively that the people who were hit by these Facebook ads that Russia paid for didn't change their opinions really in any measurable way. We can say that they actually reached relatively few people, that they were poorly done, that Donald Trump was the factor in 2016, and maybe to some degree Hillary Clinton were the factors that led to the election results. Russia did not affect the outcomes of the 2016 campaign, nor did it affect the results of any other campaign. Ditto for a lot of the Chinese and Indian meddling efforts. We can say that at best they were marginal. These interference efforts oftentimes actually backfire and push people into opposing a candidate because they see that candidate as being preferred by the Kremlin or India or whatever. So I think foreign interference is insidious and problematic in a whole bunch of other ways, but I'm just not sure that it actually affects the outcomes of elections. On top of that, mis and disinformation certainly had a very kind of particular and pointed problem over the years, but let's face it, we're now in a world where everything's disinformation, right? I mean, the US administration is, as a matter of policy, of the belief that vaccines don't work, that Ukraine started the war, that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen, that everyone who tried to show up on January 6th was either being led by an FBI plant or did everything perfectly right? Like, disinformation there's no longer any friction for the disinformation we're using. And it happens here too. Pierre Poilievre says the prime minister or the former prime minister wants to force us to all eat bugs. He said that the former environment minister wants to ban roads.
And didn't he also warn us about nuclear winter?
Yeah, I mean, you lose track at a certain point. So this is all to say that we've polluted the information space so aggressively that it's no longer a problem of mis and disinformation. It's a problem of motivated reasoning. People want to believe things that aren't true because it makes political or partisan sense for them, right? Or because they live in spaces where there is an emotional investment in the information they ascribe to. Mis and disinformation does not convince people when it touches them. It is not like COVID-19. You don't get it through the air. You believe these things because you want to. And once we start appreciating that, I think it becomes a much more difficult problem to deal with, right? If the problem was just the existence of mis and disinformation, then we would just fact check it away. We would debunk it and pre-bunk it, and everything would be hunky-dory.
Okay, I think people want to respond to you on
just
this.
to pick up on that, I agree with all of what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger problem is not that this stuff is actually persuading people, although I do think it does persuade a small slice of the population. I think the bigger concern for me, at least, is that it is, as you said, polluting the information system, polluting these platforms, and making it almost impossible to have rational, democratic conversations and debates about really important issues of public interest, and that's kind of the bigger problem. Is it's just completely derailing our conversations.
So if we've gone so completely Orwellian that it's just 2 + 2 = 5 and up is down and in is out, then how do you cover that? How do you cover anything if you feel at this point you can't rely on the public to even know or even care what's true? They're just going to believe whatever they want to believe. Matina.
But a easier pivot to the trust issue. Like, we are professionals. We have to gain the trust of audiences. I think some of these issues are generational, particularly younger people engaging with journalism, and also some of the particularly older folks. But I think that how do you cover that is you convince people that what you're reporting is accurate and real, and here's why, and let me tell you why. And so, like, rebuilding this trust basically from scratch in a whole new world, rather than being really, really annoyed, like, I am here. Do you not see me that I am here and I am a professional and I work for the New York Times? How can you not? And people are like, well, I don't believe you because you work for the New York Times. I was like, it's all sorts of, and I don't know what level of sort of self, sort of contrition and being like, yes, we've effed up. And like, yes, in that specific story, there were mistakes. This was not covered properly. Conclusions were wrong, and it goes on and on and on. Like it's like what is it? I'm really bad at idioms because English is actually my second language. But like, what is the expression with the frog and the leaping and the boiling water? This didn't happen overnight, right? You can't go back and say it was actually at that moment that something fractured permanently, and we need to mend that. And if only we could go back to them and explain to them what happened and even what the human error was, it will all be fine. No, it's a new world, and we need to start from zero again.
So I want to ask Brodie, because I know you have been working on some initiatives, right? There's something, I think it was, what's it called, the content credentials, that there's efforts to try and actually watermark images to say, so that we can know if we care. Maybe people don't. Maybe this is the issue that Justin's pointing out. They don't care what's true or not. But for those who do care, who want to know, is that true? You're developing systems in which you could actually show the provenance of photos and send that to the public, right?
Yeah, there are efforts like that, and there are trust initiatives, and CBC is part of a process with Reporters Without Borders that does an audit of your journalistic standards and practices and certifies you. But in the end, a lot of that just appeals to your given audience. It's the people we don't reach that are the problem. I have just had two thoughts. One about, just back to what Luke said about the platforms themselves. I mean, I do think there are a number of Canadians, and I'll count myself among this, who don't realize and don't believe necessarily that they too are polarized and that they too have been manipulated by algorithmic feeds of video on YouTube or TikTok that are driven by an emotional response that drives feelings of anger or frustration or cynicism. So the first thing I would say is we all need to just take stock and don't think that you're above being played. And I don't know how many of you go through an experience where you go down the YouTube rabbit hole, or you're on X or Threads, and then you leave with your jaw clenched and you're frustrated with those crazy whoever's. And for some people, that's going to be the liberal elites running the world or the crazy conservatives. So I think we all have to do a bit of self-reflection, because we are being gamed. On trust, one of the initiatives we're doing is putting more reporters on the ground. I don't know how you build trust back anymore without going back to the very basics, which is being a person, looking another person in the eyes and saying, I'm genuinely curious about your story. I am genuinely curious. And in that is the first seed of trust building. And we see it when we go into places where there are no more journalists, or where there's even great distrust of the CBC. For example, our colleagues at the Fifth Estate did some great journalism in small town in northwestern Alberta, where a library is at the center of all kinds of disinformation. Everyone on all sides of that contentious debate were grateful for the journalism, but it was because it was open-minded, curious. It didn't come in with preconceived notions, and you had a journalist really, really wanting to understand. So we're going to try to do that.
But that's really expensive, and there's very few organizations that have those resources.
Ian wants to say.
I was going to say, it's a small, tiny little thing. Sorry. It's a small, tiny little thing, but I mean, in the Globe, if you make a mistake, if readers complain, we engage with the readers, we hear them out, and we correct stories. We have that dialogue, and maybe that's a small way of making a difference. And I would say, as an individual journalist, it's trying to listen to people you encounter out in the community, talking about the things that concern them. And as especially since I've gone to the Ottawa Bureau in the last few years, it's talking to family, friends, acquaintances, people you meet on stories, but really doing the hard work of listening to what people say, what they feel, what they think about politics, what moves them and concerns them, and just really listening and trying to sort of bring that back. I mean, these are small things, I guess, but perhaps they make a difference in building trust. And in a gathering like this, I hope there are questions, to hear from people here about what they think about trust, because like as a journalist, I'm in a bureau in that world, so I need to hear in an encounter like this in the center of one of the largest cities in North America, a very interesting group of people, what they think about that trust issue.
Just, before I came here this evening, I just printed out a couple of quotes from Masha Gessen, the now living in the States, now at the New York Times reporter. If you don't read them, you should, because they're incredible. But Gessen wrote, I'll just read this quote, when the time comes for recovery, which it inevitably will, and they mean recovery from the crisis we're now in. When the time comes for recovery, we will need to rebuild a shared sense of reality. That will require a new approach. No more anodyne headlines, equivocal statements, and extreme restraint. We'll have to state directly what we are seeing, and to do that, journalists will have to reveal where they stand.
Journalists, classic journalists don't, columnists stand.
And so the question is it time we have to change that?
Just going back is something I meant to mention. I write a newsletter for the Globe on politics every day, or 5 days a week, and I hear from readers occasionally. And as long as there's no snark in the response, I always respond to readers. If someone writes in and says, something, I always make a point of writing back, not pages and pages, but just acknowledging that they have written and that they have shared a viewpoint. And I think that, that kind of engagement is important. But to the question you just asked,
what Gessen is saying is that we never say where we stay. We're not supposed to, right? That's one of the rules that it's not. I think we've come a long way from the view from nowhere, which I don't think we do anymore to that degree. But we're still in this place where we're not coming at where we are the sort of tabula rasa.
But the classic news reporter shouldn't say where they come from. I mean, a columnist has that freedom. But do
we all agree?
But what arrogance to assume that your gaze is better than the reader's. I write exactly what I report, and I can tell you different people draw completely different conclusions from that, and that's where the politics is. That's where people bring their own experiences. I'm not going to tell anyone what to think, not because I don't have views. Of course I do, and it's impossible to control for all human bias. It is simply not possible. But to be leading people with your own polluting reality, like we have to believe that there is a truth. We have to go back to that. Is there a truth? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people out there who 100% want us to believe that there is no such thing as the truth anymore.
I haven't heard from Nicole in a bit, maybe.
I think actually many readers do know where we stand. And that is why we've actually maybe lost some public trust, is because people don't feel like that they can see it and we're pretending that they can't. I want to recommend to this room a book by Monica Guzman, and I never thought of it that way. She is an American journalist that I saw speak last year, and I was blown away by her perspective, which she came as someone who said, I was a liberal journalist, the daughter of an immigrant family that has voted for Trump. And she said, and I could not reconcile how my parents could vote for Trump. And she said, and I approached my journalism, frankly, with disdain for people who voted for Trump. And she's like, and then I had to realize that was influencing the way that I was writing stories. And her point, I had her do a call with the Star newsroom. And the point that she made is that many journalists are coming from a liberal perspective, and that we need to acknowledge that, and that we have to check our own polarization. And I think that was the point earlier, is that we think we're immune to it. And her point was like, we're not. She has this wonderful, it's the classic Walt Whitman line of be curious, not judgmental. And she made the point that journalists have perhaps failed in that maybe we have been more judgmental than we have been curious.
Luke, you had your hand up?
Yeah, 2 points. So first of all, I think the best response to the trust question is transparency and just being clear about where you stand on things. My organization, we are very clearly social democratic in our editorial approach. For me, that means that we, believe in democracy. We believe in egalitarianism. So we are going to take a clear stand on those issues. And I don't see anything incompatible with truth and also having just a general commitment to the idea of democracy or to the idea of egalitarianism, for example. And I mean, if you look at a lot of nonprofit organizations, a lot of companies even, they'll have like vision statements, they'll have organizational values. I mean, these are kind of like North Star guiding principles that, sort of guide the actions of the organization. And I don't see anything really incompatible with, being, providing accurate, truthful information on important issues, and then also being rooted in some sense of values. And those values could be ranged from like I could totally see a center right perhaps organization kind of approaching things in those ways with a commitment to just fiscal responsibility or something like that. So I don't see it as a big problem.
Brodie.
I will be among the last to abandon the goal of impartiality, partly because we did a survey of Canadians when there was a lot of questions about whether we should just jettison that as a principle. The whole industry was going through it. And if you ask Canadians what they think about that word and what it means to them, it means facts and truth, and by a large majority. And obviously, there's all kinds of interpretation to go into that. But when we asked them, where would you rank it among other principles, everything from empathy to accuracy to balance, it was right at the top, right under accuracy. So the word means something to people. The idea means something. And the other piece of evidence that I look at is countries that have both public broadcasters or media organizations that really have a strong value around impartial, fact-based journalism have higher trust scores in the media than those that don't. And the lowest trust scores in the world right now are in America, where I think we saw news organizations sort of abandon impartiality. So I think it's a worthwhile debate, and it is absolutely true. There's no such thing as robotic objective journalism, and we bring all kinds of bias and perspective and viewpoint. But the idea that we're going to try to get to truth using a process that is journalistic is something I think is still very valuable, and the audience wants.
If I can jump in quickly as well, is I think it is also about where do you put your resources. And I think there are a lot of media outlets, particularly in America, that invested very heavily in opinion. And that really dominated the amount of the type of content people were getting. And as news organizations, we are constantly making decisions about how we are spending our resources. And frankly, opinion sometimes can sell. And so it is the easier thing to invest in. It's had real consequences. And I think the more we invest in journalism, like reporting, the better we'll see. I read a post today that one of the most important things in this moment is to invest in local journalism. Because maybe we can't agree about the biggest issues, but we can probably agree that we care about what happens at our local library, or we can agree we care about what's happening at the school board. But we've given up that kind of journalism. And instead, so many of us are just focused on the highest level of journalism, in which it's the most polarized in how we feel.
I mean, I think it's a bit unfair to say that we gave up on it. Like, to ignore the disruptive impact of technology and the internet on local journalism and to blame us for those outcomes, I think is unfair.
That maybe wasn't the right way to put it.
Yeah.
I think
we
lost it.
Yes, it's been lost, and it's devastating, and it's a massive problem because, again, to do it national level, or even, I consider the Star a national paper, even though I've been corrected on that. We don't have enough resources to do it, and there's kind of no way to go back. I mean, the Times funds a massive local journalism revival initiative, but I just don't think it's coming back. How?
We're not helpless, though. We created, some of this problem was inflicted upon us, some of this problem we created ourselves, but we're not helpless to solve it, right? And especially now at a time where money is at least kind of coming back into our coffers a little bit for a variety of reasons now, and a time when everyone's engaged in the news and we are in a moment of crisis, now is the time to reform ourselves. Because, listen, I've done it all in this industry at this point over the last 15 odd years. Like, I'm a former contributor to Sun News, our answer to Fox News. You would not have remembered this. I've worked for CBC, I've worked for the Globe and Mail, I've read a column now for the Star, I've done investigations, I've done opinion, I've done the whole gambit. And the reality is, I think people want different things, right? People want analysis, they want opinion, they want hard news, they want investigations, they want fun, they want entertainment, they want auto reviews. And we used to do this wonderful thing. We used to chop down trees, and then on those dead trees, we used to print all of the news of the day, and we used to bundle it together and throw it at people's doorsteps. And they would get it, and maybe they didn't actually want to read the news. Maybe they wanted the comics. Maybe they wanted the crosswords. But they would have to leaf through all of the news and the opinion. And the wonderful thing about a newspaper is that it would surprise you. And I think that is the single greatest thing a journalist can do, is surprise you, right? Is to either come from a place you didn't expect them to come from, or give you a piece of information you didn't expect to get, right? Surprising people is the best thing we can do. And because this newspaper was full of stuff you didn't want, we constantly surprised you, right? We've lost the ability to do that. Why did we lose the ability to do that? Because we stopped being the intermediary. We stopped delivering the product. We let Facebook and Twitter and Google do it. And they don't care about surprising people. They want to give people thin gruel that they've come to want, right? They want to serve ad dollars. They don't want to make people uncomfortable. They don't want to surprise people. And we are continuing to let them wreck our information ecosystem. How many of us are still on Twitter? How many of us are still using Facebook and Instagram and Threads to deliver our news? We are part of the problem. We are letting this happen.
Okay, but last word, and I'm going to turn to another question.
But it's also bigger than just us. I mean, I do, if you zoom back a bit, I think we see distrust in institutions around the world. It's media around the world, but it's also universities and government. And there is a bit of a printing press moment happening here. It just, it's happened much faster than the printing press, but it's really about gatekeepers losing hold of the production and distribution of information. That's now happened with digital and social, and so everybody's got a voice. And so you do expect in those moments great disruption. Printing press means the disruption of the church and other means of, the power brokers. That's kind of happening now. So I sometimes think it is us, it is those platforms. It's also much bigger and historic.
That's the long view, that's for sure. I just went, it was an interesting study, a Canadian government agency that was doing a study of security threats to Canada, and listing the various things that would create insecurity. And logically on that list were things like another pandemic, war, climate change. Number one on the list, was if Canadians could no longer tell the difference between what's true and what's false. And that was the biggest security threat that we face. Because if we can't trust what is true, if we don't know what's true anymore, then we're lost. This is something that Hannah Arendt spoke of. Hannah Arendt, the philosopher who said that when people can't, this is it's called in the origins of totalitarianism. She wrote that this is how it begins, is that when you don't convince people of the lies, you just render them incapable of knowing what's true or what's not true. So you get to this place where you say, I don't know, this might be true, it might not be, this might be a real, I don't know what to believe anymore. And Hannah Arendt said, with such people, you can do anything. So I'm just, as my last question before we go to the audience, how dangerous is that, and how close are we to that point? I'll start with Luke.
Thank you. Big question. So the question is,
how dangerous is it that we're at the point where people, if people not being able to tell what's true or not? We discussed earlier comments that, well, people don't care what's true. They want to believe what they want to believe. But if you no longer, if people are saying, throwing up their hands, I don't know what's true anymore. I don't know what to believe. Maybe they're eating dogs in Springfield, Ohio. I don't know. Maybe it's true. Who knows? That's the point we're at.
Yeah. I think to me, I take that as an expression of an anxiety about technology in general. I think there's a need for greater digital literacy. I'm someone who grew up, kind of on the internet. It's very natural to me. I know that's not the experience of everyone, not just for like age, but I mean also maybe for reasons of income and what have you. So yeah, I mean, I think the solution to that is greater digital literacy. I just don't know any other way to approach that.
Let's go down the line. Nicole.
That's a big question. I tried to get my son to come tonight, and he wanted to come, but he was worried that if he came, I would point him out so he didn't.
He was right.
So he made the right decision. But I often worry about the next generation on this point, and that idea that nothing's real. But here's the thing that I actually find gives me some hope, is that my son does not read The Star or the New York Times or the CBC, but he knows exactly what's going on. And when I go home and I can talk to him, he will talk to me about what the latest Trump thing is, and he is getting that from YouTube. And he is getting that from people that make me nervous, that he's getting it from. But I also like that my son cares, and that he is paying attention, and that I can sit down and start to have a conversation with him in which I try to embrace that thing of be curious, not judgmental. Because I gotta tell you, my instinct immediately wants to become like, that's wrong, that's not true, you're being pulled in by these people who are lying to you. The parenting lesson is always never to take that approach, but that's really not the way to bring people into a meaningful discussion where you're trying to convince someone that they're wrong and that they don't understand the truth. Again, when I mentioned Monica Guzman, her great line is, stop asking people why they believe something. Ask them how they came to believe something. And I really love that distinction, and that is how I try to approach those conversations with my son. I try not to be scared where he's getting his information. I try to be open to having a conversation with him about why he's believing certain things and being curious and hoping that will get us to a place where we can agree what truth is. And I say that in I don't want it to sound like my son is being pulled in by these people. My point is that I like to approach those conversations of a place of curiosity, and he often makes me second guess things that I believe are true too.
Ian.
Well, by the way, that's a very interesting report. I remember reading it. It's worth reading. I haven't written science fiction. This may sound like a tangent, but there's a sort of a suggestion about writing science fiction that says you want to come up with an idea, you pick a subject, and you say, if this goes on, and then see where that arc is, and there you've got your science fiction story. And the notion of a population that doesn't know what to believe sounds like a science fiction novel I probably should write. But I don't think we're there yet. But we have reasonably robust news organizations in this country and even in the troubled United States to sort of try and convey the truth. So I don't think we're there yet. But given the anxieties of the times, the realities of the times, that notion is sort of on the horizon, is what I would say.
Matina.
I actually think that for an upsettingly large percentage of the population, we are there. And I think that we are siloed, and I do think that it's too late. I think COVID wreaked havoc, permanent damage to information systems and societies, it's sort of, and for some people, there's not going to be coming back. And unfortunately, what Aaron said, I don't think this is obviously the majority, And I think that these are dynamic trends and we can reverse some of them. But unfortunately, as news organizations and as societies, yes, I do think that that's happened to a certain degree.
Listen, I agree with basically everything Luke was saying up until media literacy. Our problem is not a lack of media literacy. People know how to read the news. Oftentimes, they're not getting it delivered because, like I said earlier, Google and Twitter and Facebook have become unreliable newspaper delivery boys for our modern era, or because they're just not interested in the way we're describing and reporting the news. And that's okay to some degrees. Not everyone has to like the CP voice. Not everyone has to like the Toronto Star ethos, right? There has to be sort of diversity. We need to figure out a better way of delivering them the news and bringing them into an ecosystem where it's not just one headline they're getting, but in fact, it's an entire kind of package of opinion and analysis and things that surprise people again. But let me actually pick up on a point of optimism, kind of on the flip side of what Nicole just said. What are these YouTube shows and these podcasts a lot of young people are listening to? We like to focus, I think not wrongly, on the disinformation and the problems and the conspiracy theories that come from them. But fundamentally, what is the Joe Rogan Experience? It is a 3-hour show featuring 2 people discussing any and everything, getting into the weeds, talking about particulars, citing reports and evidence, Googling things in real time. It is an odyssey into the unknown. It's also deeply stupid. Like, it is fundamentally, categorically stupid. But they've hit on something brilliant. They've hit on a hunger for and a curiosity for knowledge. And we've not done a good job of competing with that. We do need to figure out, how do we deliver something in that format for people? We became really sensorial over the years, especially during COVID. We got really into telling people what not to think. And we did it for good reasons. We did it because, and we were wrong to do this. I mean, one of the reasons Twitter is what it is today is because the ancien regime of Twitter decided to deplatform tens of thousands of people for posting bad things. And they were genuinely bad things. But those, and at the behest of the Biden administration, absolutely. Those people moved to Gab and Truth Social and Parler and Rumble and these other formats that are now huge. They have now, through a backlash, taken over half of the social media internet, right? So media literacy is not going to save us. Just slightly tinkering with our voice and our tone and doing slightly better coverage won't save us either. These are all good things. But fundamentally, we need to figure out how to get back in the conversation, to show people we're interested in debating and conversation and challenging ideas, to show them that we're not out to censor them or tell them they're wrong or stupid, but in fact that we want to engage, that we're as curious as they are. We just want to do it with a bit more rigor and ethics than Joe Rogan.
Brodie.
Well, I had an alarming moment when a good friend of mine sent me a story link and said, "Is this true?" And I opened it. It was a CBC article. I wanted to kill him.
Did you say yes or no?
I couldn't even respond. So I do worry about this, but I also think there's an opportunity in it. And in fact, on Sunday, when an election is called, we'll have a new promo for CBC's election coverage, and it's about being a bastion of kind of sanity among the noise. I think if we can position ourselves as that safe refuge in a really messy information ecosystem, perhaps there's an opportunity to reestablish. And again, it goes back to the principles which have served us well. I think you need to double down on those principles and really live up to them of being fair, accurate, balanced, acting with integrity, accuracy, and then the work should draw an audience that is admittedly confused. So I'm hoping that that's an opportunity for us.
I'm going to solicit audience questions now. Can I just say, I know that this probably stirred up a lot of thoughts and feelings in everybody, and I know it's tempting to express those views. And there'll be a chance, maybe you can come and talk to people afterwards. But can I just ask you just to pose a question and not to have too much preamble, because that would be most useful, I think, to most people here. And I'm going to pass this mic over to Lisa, who's going to, and there's another one over there with Michelle. Operators are standing by. And this gentleman here.
Thank you all so much. My name is Luke Stark. I'm an assistant professor at FIMS at Western. I'm pulling out a contradiction in the conversation, which is that you all, to a certain extent, agree that truth and facts are both real and important, but also that it's okay to, and in fact desirable, to debate those truths and facts with people you know are wrong. So I'm wondering.
Yeah, we couldn't hear what there's.
Yeah,
the people you
know are wrong, right? So I'm wondering how you grapple with that contradiction in the context of journalism and the information environment.
I have a very immediate response to this, which is we don't have to debate I mean, listen, facts. David Byrne once wrote that facts just twist the truth around, which I always really like. The reality is you don't have to debate, let's say, whether or not trans people exist. They do, right? But I think what you hear from people is a genuine anxiety and confusion and uncertainty about this thing that feels quite new and novel and uncertain to them, right? And a lot of the times they'll jump into a conclusion, which is that trans people aren't real, or they're doing medical experiments on children, or whatever, all these odious things that I think we know are wrong. That doesn't mean that you just have to go, oh, well, you said the wrong thing, you're wrong and you're bad, goodbye, right? What our response as journalists should be is, well, how did you get there? Like, why do you believe that, right? Because I've actually had this conversation with people who have jumped into, this conversation with me by saying, you're believing the woke nonsense, this is so bad for children, they all regret it, and they detransition and all these other things. I started sitting down with him and going, okay, listen, let's go through this. Do you know how much clinical research goes into gender-affirming care? Do you know how much disagreement there is amongst doctors who provide gender-affirming care? Do you know how much change happens based on good evidence and science about when, let's say, hormone blockers are prescribed? And at the end of the conversation, I won't say he was convinced and he was waving, a pride flag in my face, but I will say he ended it by going, I didn't know any of that, right? He was surprised. Right? And so I think that's how you engage these conversations. You go back to their primary values, you ignore their conclusions, because if you start at the conclusion, you debate that, you're never going to get anywhere. You start by talking about facts, you talk about values, you talk about context and evidence, and I think you get a long way by engaging on those premises.
I think it's what Nicole was saying earlier about just ask, where do you get that? What is your evidence? And start from the premise of asking, how do you know that?
Yeah, one of my favorite comments that I read on our website was about bike lanes. And it was someone in the comments said, the fight over the bike lane in my neighborhood makes me realize why people come to vote for Trump. And he said, I'm a cyclist. I did not believe this bike lane in my neighborhood was a good decision. And when I tried to voice that, everyone shut me down like I was a lunatic. And he said, and it made me angry that now I'm like someone who's trying to tear down bike lanes because no one would listen to me, that I didn't think that this bike lane made sense where it was. And I agree with Justin in this thing. Like, I don't think that everyone is debating that no facts are true. I think people are saying, I want to have a discussion about this thing that I think is worthy of debate. And that is the lesson. I love that example of, when we shut down discussion about vaccines during COVID, that didn't help. It made it worse. We would have been better to have a discussion about concerns that people had and if there were valid concerns, but instead we shut it down. And I think that's why we get to a place of people think that there is no truth, there are no facts.
But I do think that there are limits, and different news organizations, as well as different individual people and journalists, will put those limits in different places. But I don't think everything is up for debate. That's just me.
Okay, there's a question, this young woman here. We can get a microphone to you somehow.
We've got one question here if you want to go quickly here.
So we have, I think, a bit of a contradiction because we have Brodie saying that, pointing out that Canadians actually value impartiality as a principle. And everybody's saying that we don't want to reject the idea of different views, and we want to double down, in fact, on the traditional principles, some traditional principles in order to build trust. On the other hand, we have everybody saying Of course, there's no such thing as, the dreaded O word. There is bias all the time, and what we have to do is try to somehow show people in our writing and reporting something of how we came to the conclusions we come to ourselves. How practically, what is the path practically toward that? How do you do that? What is a sentence that, that does that kind of interpretation where you actually, you were transparent about what you're doing, that will not raise the kind of fears about transgressing impartiality
Thank you.
that we're all afraid of.
Thank you. Who wants to? Yeah, Nicole.
I mean, I will say quickly on that is that my point about being more honest is actually being more honest with ourselves as journalists. I very much believe, I'm like Brodie, that I want to go back to those values and think that we have to double down. To do that, though, I think we have to acknowledge where we have failed. This is why I also do believe in the power of large media organizations, because you also have to trust the process. You have to trust that there are editors, that there are many people there that are asking us to check our bias, to are questioning if we are being objective about it. So my point actually is more that I think that we have to be honest that maybe we have failed in that goal.
Yeah. Hi. Yes.
Hello. I am one of the students in the Masters of Media Journalism and Communications at Western. And so I feel like often I've come to these conferences or discussions and there's been a conversation about young people and what it means for the future of journalism. And there was a comment that Justin made about how we're still on these platforms, X, Instagram, etc., and how maybe we should be stepping away from them. But those are the platforms where the young people are. And I do think there are conversations being had about the news, and that's how we're engaging in these conversations. So are we willing to find a way to meet in the middle and continue those conversations on those platforms despite, Bill C-18 and the Online News Act or these traditional ways of viewing journalism? Because I think there are young people who want to have these conversations. They're just not going online to your websites directly.
Yeah.
I'll start with Ian though. This one, where we done?
Maybe a very brief comment. I'm still on X. Because I'm a journalist who, deals with the news every day, and I'm on Blue Sky as well, but reluctantly. X is where Mark Carney skates with the Edmonton Oilers or whatever is happening. It's happening in real time on X, although I am mindful of the failings of X every time I go on X. I think it's what's the word? It's taken some really interesting twists, but I have to be there unless I stop being a daily journalist. What I would say though is if you're on X though, I think it's incumbent to be really, I don't retweet anything without really checking who's behind it and going much deeper now than I would have, say, 5 or 6 or 7 years ago.
Just in the middle.
Yeah. As a former young person, let me. I mean, yeah. Depends who you ask. Listen. I think for me, there's a big dividing line. Is the platform being manipulated for opaque ends? We know for a fact that is true on Twitter. We actually have good data now that, and I will be really honest, I think it's an ethical failing that any journalist is still on it. If we left, it would, I'm sorry, I do. And I understand why people are there because it feels hard to quit because the news is there, but the news would stop being there if we weren't there. It is a chicken and egg thing and we gotta leave it. Because it's not a neutral platform. It is a platform that is being weaponized for lies and for partisan ends. It would be like we're running all of our news stories in the Conservative Party Times. Like, what are we doing? Ditto for Facebook and I think to some degree Threads as well, which deprioritizes news, which actually makes it harder to have real conversations. And Twitter's verification system does the same thing by prioritizing people who pay the most, right? Like these are antithetical to how we ought to be delivering news. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't be online and on social media, but are there platforms that are not algorithmic, that are not biased. A lot of young people are not going day to day on Twitter. They're in Discord, they're on Slack, they're on YouTube, they're on platforms that are less manipulated, that are more conversation oriented. How do we get into those spaces? That to me is a much bigger priority than being on Twitter, which is, I think, a totally Potemkin and fake conversation.
Well, I got to say, make it sound like cigarettes or something. But
I think it is. I think it's probably more deadly.
But look, I think the work is harder to wade through Twitter. I mean, it's much, much harder to wade through it and to quality check it, whether for journalists or for anyone else, by the way, on it. To get any value out of it.
Okay, Matina.
Just I'll try and respond quickly to your question. I think for us, the challenge is to do two things at once. And this is like very buzzy in newsrooms right now. We have to, quote unquote, meet people where they are. And that means off-platform. That's what, at the Times, that's what we call those platforms, off-platform, off our platform. And what we want to do is cultivate trust with you on the platform you're on, and then lure you in. So you come to our platform, but that means our platform needs to be reformed. And that reform is the hardest thing, to change the way we write, to change the way we present, to change the aesthetic of the platform, to make it, I went on my paper's homepage the other day, and there were 4 parallel videos of reporter videos. And I was like, oh my God, this is how it ends. There's 4 faces talking to me simultaneously. So it doesn't look pretty, but we're experimenting, because this is the transition we want to make as we reform our platforms. And as I write the same 5,000 words in different ways, and I rearrange the words so that one of them will get you on TikTok and make you come and read me where I'm at, and make you pay, hopefully, so I can keep having a job.
Okay, get Luke, and then we're going to get a question out here.
Yeah, Matina, you took the point I was about to make. Like, I used to subscribe to the idea of meeting people where they are and, going into the spaces where they are. But, I quit X, several months ago, and what did it for me was some person in the replies said something like, oh, I wouldn't be on X still if it wasn't for accounts like yours and others. And then I realized, I'm actually enabling this person to continue, staying on this platform. And because I'm, putting out content that's keeping people's attention on that, staying on that platform, I'm actually part of the problem. So I recognize that. And as an organization, we're now kind of contemplating about having some sort of ethical platform policy, because, I think we do want to be on as many platforms as possible, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge that some platforms are better than others, and we should only use platforms, for example, that have good moderation policies and, protect the users that are using it, things like that. But it's something that we're thinking through, and I have no answers.
It's a work in progress, obviously. I'm going to get a question down here.
Hi, my name is Sarushe. I'm a journalism student at TMU. So I recently got a pitch for a political article, a political pitch. So that means this was my first time interviewing politicians, specifically from the Liberal Party. And that means this was my first time dealing with media-trained answers. So my question to the panel is, how do I interview a politician without making them feel like I'm attacking them, and also trying to minimize the media-trained answers? Because sometimes I felt like I was getting a media-trained answer.
Yeah. Okay, good. You're going to get to some of the pros now.
I love this question because I was surprised during the pandemic where a lot more people were watching the news and actually watching politicians be grilled. And I was getting complaints saying, your journalists are so rude. And it was because I think a lot of people were coming to the political scrum for the first time, which has been a decade's tradition. And scrums are the way they are which means aggressive questions, persistent questions, not letting the politician off the hook, asking again and again, and sometimes shouting to do exactly what you were trying to do, is to get at the real answer and get them off the script. But it's interesting to me that people don't like that suddenly, especially if it's a politician that they care for. But I would say this is all about accountability, and how do you do a good accountability interview? Well, one, you could listen to some tapes by this woman who is one of the best at it. But what you do, truly, you ask the question, and you be persistent and ask again. And sometimes you ask the third time, and that non-answer says everything, and the audience gets it. Because the thing is, people are smart too. They know what's happening. So
don't care about their feelings. Their feelings don't matter. What matters is they work for your readers. That's what matters.
And go into the interview with your agenda, your agenda in the sense of what you're looking for, the story you're looking for. And, the politician will come in with you mentioned agenda or their message track. And it's sort of the responsibility of any journalist to knock politicians off their message track because, 99.9% of the time the message track is going to be of no use to your readers or to you. But I think you can do that persistently, and it depends on the story and it depends on your research. I think you can do that without being yelling or screaming or slamming a fist on the table. I think there are ways to do that. The question why is always a good thing to try in an interview. But I think you can knock them off their message track and go on a track to some place that suits your needs. But again, it depends on the interview. It depends on the subject. It depends what you need for your project.
Carol Off's interview. This is one. Carol Off's interview with Conrad Black is one to definitely study. We have a question down here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Ebley. I'm a student at the MMJC program at Western here. And I just want to say thank you. This is really interesting. But I also kind of just want to ask a question more from sort of a different perspective. I'm from Winnipeg. I'm from kind of central Canada. And it's interesting to kind of hear the perspectives of Canadian politics, Canadian news, and the CBC is hiring these multiple journalists in small towns. I believe it's 9 in the prairies, which is nice. But it was really interesting when I think you brought up, Brodie, the story about going into northern Alberta and focusing on this library that was telling these issues of disinformation. And it seems, especially kind of in the prairies, that it can kind of get lost on sort of the news and the focus. And we really try to focus a lot on like the Toronto, and I understand that lots of people do live in this area and kind of just data in that way. But in terms, it seems like when we're talking about news sort of in the prairies, especially like Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, it's really sort of focusing it, everything is really kind of on a local angle, and it seems that it's difficult to kind of go onto more of like a national scale, and it seems that it's not wanting to touch more of these like larger conversations of larger political issues, and everything is sort of really kind of based down into more like maybe like bite-sized pieces so that the content, I guess, could potentially bode well. I'm trying to not mince my words here, but I hope that makes some sense in a way.
I can hear Brodie's answers in his head. Yeah, I can have the same thing.
Well, this is a challenge. It's just about a diversity of perspective, geographical perspectives, and how does that inform programming. And a lot of our organizations are based in Toronto or New York, where that's the bulk of our people work, and so that shifts. That is a real issue for us, because you always have to ask yourselves, okay, whose voice or perspective is not here at the story table right now as we're discussing this thing, and why? So we're being very deliberate about that. Everything from trying to figure out a way to decentralize the assignment system at CBC, to have assignment editors rooted in different places across the country, the hiring of more journalists in local. And it goes to trust, too. If I look at CBC, where do we have the greatest trust? It's where because of the way we evolved from Eastern Canada to the West, we have more of a presence in the East, strong presence in Quebec with Radio-Canada. That's where trust is the greatest. Where is it the weakest? It's in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And so I back to that idea where, again, the economics aside, trust is built by being in community, reporting on people's communities. And if you're not there, it's impossible to build trust. So just off the top of my head, some answers to that.
We just have, we have so many people wanting to ask questions. I'll limit to one answer from the stage if you don't, unless you think otherwise. And obviously over there.
Hi.
Hi.
I've been reading a lot of tech stuff because I'm trying to figure out what the hell Elon Musk is doing. And two things come up. One is algorithms mean that you can't talk to people who don't agree with you because you only get information, the information you get, and certainly that's what I find, is the things that you're likely to agree with. That's how the algorithms work, so that they can sell you more, right? So how do we challenge that? And the second thing is something from Jesse Hirsch, who's quite a well-known writer on technology, who's saying what we should be doing is create a Canadian platform that all of you could post on, and as well as right-wing media as well, so that we can challenge their control of all of these interactive platforms, but it has to put a lot of money in it to promote it. And at this moment of Canadian patriotism might be a good time to do it.
I'll get Justin to answer that.
Yeah. So I mean, to some degree, this is kind of happening. I mean, listen, algorithmic transparency is a baseline for far too long. Facebook and some of the other platforms have tinkered with the algorithm without telling us. We have, thanks to whistleblowers, evidence that they made changes that prioritized anger-inducing content. And it created a feedback loop where political parties and newspapers started delivering more anger-inducing headlines in order to satisfy the algorithm. That made us all completely nuts. And we're still dealing with the consequences of that. So requiring them to be transparent, I think, should be a baseline. On top of that, there's a conversation now about algorithm. This is getting a little techie, but I'm just gonna. There's a conversation about algorithmic markets. So platforms that allow you to pick your own algorithms, right? So, and actually, places like Blue Sky do exactly this. On Blue Sky, you could either create your own algorithm or take somebody else's, and that algorithm could just serve you exclusively stuff that you don't like, or exclusively stuff from people you don't follow, or exclusively from stuff from people you've blocked if you want. So, or more realistically, you could do it from all of the newspapers you really like, or all of the influencers you really like. That, it seems to be a really kind of positive way forward. And above and beyond that, both Blue Sky, Mastodon, and some other kind of social media platforms are trying to figure out what it would look like to build a decentralized kind of social web where different platforms can kind of plug into it and you can share content all across them. I don't think it makes sense to make a kind of closed, walled garden Canadian social media platform, but would it make sense for Canada to create a system or a platform or a distribution model that plugs in to this decentralized internet? It sounds a little science fiction-y, but this is actually a lot closer than people might think. This technology is being implemented, these systems are being deployed, and people are using them. There's already millions of people using systems on this decentralized web, and I think there is a lot of potential there, but it's going to require us being early adopters and getting in early, encouraging people to go onto it, and underlining what makes these things better than the old system.
Okay, wait, go to Susan.
Hi, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for this panel. It's just amazing. The question I have, that twice tonight, I've heard the term, it's no longer about annexing, it's about invasion. And what I want to know is, you on the stage there, especially the CBC, are you having discussions in your newsroom about how to keep Canadians informed without engendering panic? Because I have a stepdaughter who's completely panicking about this idea that this might be the next Ukraine.
Wow, that's a very big and important question. I might get a few people to respond. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yes. I mean, we first of all, we take the responsibility not to amplify anxiety and yet be true to the story. And I referenced the deep emotions that are happening. So, you know, your relative or daughter, anyway, not alone. And that manifests for us in complaints about how dare you even talk about this, because in talking about it, you might be legitimizing the idea of annexation. I had a few thousand complaints around that not long ago. So it's just a tricky thing to do, but you also, we've seen, you just don't dismiss everything that comes out of the president's mouth either, because there are real world consequences and things happen. So we are just taking a rational approach and trying to be very clear about what we know and what we don't know. And I think, again, when it comes to trust, we do not need to have all the answers. I think a sense of humility as a journalist is say, here's what we've got locked down and can tell you as fact, and here are the 6 things we don't know right now, is a powerful way to tell a story. And that's one we're going to have to do with this kind of thing.
Okay, I just wanted to do a follow, if you don't mind, of Jody's to Brodie about that. But what this woman is describing is this panic attack that her relative is having, and this is, many people are having this panic attack. And so if you're talking about reasonable, rational coverage, how do you communicate these kinds of threats and encourage people to not have them this information bypass their rational side and go right to their gut, which is where it's going, which is why Trump was able to win. That's how Pierre Poilievre rolls, right? You play to that gut feeling, you play to emotions. How do you inform people about the possibility of that and not have it become an anxiety-ridden moment of irrational information? How do you do that?
Well, yeah, the job of all of us is not to pour a soothing, warm bath for Canadians every night either. It's a really, but I'm not being, I mean, there are hard things, difficult things, horrible things happening that you have to cover and be real about them. But you do it the way you do any story. You tell the audience what you know. You bring voices and perspectives around that and give a 360-degree view. Smart people who know stuff, who have something to say, and then you let the audience decide where we're at. So I think it's back to the basics of journalism and reporting. It's asking all the questions, exploring all the angles, and trying to get as much around that story as much as you can, and then take it day by day.
I'm going to get the question back here, and then the woman over here has been so patient.
Hi, my name is Saturn Steele Mendez. I am a journalism student at TMU, and I wanted to ask you about where we can learn to have better conversations. So as we know, education is barriered. And so outside of academic institutions, what do journalism students and engaged citizens need to do to bring truth back into our everyday conversations in our penny universities like cafes and other third spaces?
I'm going to turn that over to Nicole.
I think the most important thing that journalists can do is have friends who are not journalists. Truly, I mean that. I think the most important thing I did as a journalist in the last few years is I joined a softball team full of people who I don't know that they even read the newspaper. And it is the most informative thing I can do as I think about my job and how to do it well is to go sit with a bunch of people who have perspective that it's very difficult to have when you're a journalist.
So I just want to say thank you. I think it's the happiest I've felt tonight. And I do feel that people have despair and fear. And it is fully occupying. So this is the equity and civic engagement question. Of course, equity, one of those words that has been outlawed. Canada in 2025, a quick Google search tells us there are 27 million eligible voters. And let's say half of those have the skills, resources, networks, et cetera, to become actively engaged in these conversations. Because bets are this is a pretty rarefied crowd here with lots of education and wealth. So I guess my question is, how can journalists help us mobilize 13 million people to engage amongst ourselves in keeping all of the equity factors in mind.
Can you turn that to Ian?
Yeah. Oh.
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. Sorry.
Do you mind if I take this? Because
I'll turn to Justin.
I also want to marry it to the question about kind of the panic of possible invasion. Because listen, it's not our job to mobilize people, right? Like that is just basic. Like, we are journalists. Everyone has their own roles in society, civil society, activist groups, NGOs, politicians, political organizations. It is their responsibility to mobilize people. It's not ours. But it is our responsibility to adequately explain the stakes, to explain the threats, and to help people understand how previous states and peoples have gone through this, right? So like this time last year, I was in Ukraine. Ukraine has a frontline experience with dealing with a hybrid regime next door. We are fast approaching having a hybrid regime next door. We don't know what a hybrid regime is. It is basically a kind of very modern mix of authoritarian and democratic. Hungary has become basically a hybrid regime. We've seen it throughout the global south, and Russia is a prime example. There's a patina of democracy, but functionally a lot of the civil society and civic engagement has disappeared. Ukraine, as many other nations in Europe have learned, it is unbelievably important to create resilient institutions in the media, in civil society, in political parties, and all the way down the line, that through kind of a decentralized network keep people engaged, informed, and interested and resilient against kind of the hybrid threats that face them. I think that is something we need to start thinking very seriously about, because we've allowed a lot of our civil society to decay over the last decade, and I think it's been a huge mistake.
I'm going to end this just very, as they say, we only have 30 seconds, as they say on radio. But just very briefly, I would like each of you just to give just a few words of advice, especially for the young people here, who are going to be following this election. Maybe it's the first time you've really been engaged in a federal election. It's been a while. But just what advice would you give for how to be following the events come Sunday? I'll start with Luke, and we'll work our way down. Just a few ideas.
Look to a number of different sources and just make up your own mind based on getting a bunch of different data points from different sources. I think that's the best way to consume news in this day of age, and also to acknowledge that you are in the position as a news consumer to kind of construct meaning and to make decisions about what you believe based on what you're hearing from different sources.
I would agree that if we know that algorithms are pointing us toward things that support our worldview, then it's on us to make sure that we are actively seeking out things that challenge us. I think it is important to make sure that you're not going to the same media outlet every day to get your news, that there is value. In fact, value in even going to media outlets that you really disagree with to see what they're saying. And I also think when I hear people talking about that anxiety, I think it is real and that we have to pace ourselves. And I worry actually that when I talk about that in the beginning of COVID, people couldn't stop reading the news until they couldn't bear to read the news and they just stopped. I really hope that doesn't happen this time. I am very encouraged by how engaged people are in this moment. I also want people to make sure that they're not drowning right now in the amount of content so that they can continue to be engaged.
I'm going to pick part of what Nicole said, which is to look at media, to change your media diet, go to other credible media sources. But I'm going to add something to that, and that is to go to CPAC. CPAC Online, this is a parliamentary channel where if Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney or Jagmeet Singh does a scrum, they show you the live feed with the journalists' questions. And to your question about how to get off the message track, go to CPAC, and if you have the time, watch unedited how this dialogue goes on, what's said. I was on CPAC today, Mark Carney's newser in Edmonton. The whole newser is there. Pierre Poilievre and Jean-Pierre today talking about LNG. And by the way, kicking journalists off his tour. He does, to his credit, he does explain his logic. It's an interesting logic, but it's all there. So take the time to sort of go to CPAC. You can watch it on your phone. You can watch it on a laptop or an iPad, and they do premiers, mayors, leaders across the country. and let's expand it. C-SPAN in the United States also does a very similar thing. So, and again, you can watch it online, but that would be my advice. Go and look and read. And to someone who asked a question over here, and I think Nicole answered it, aggressive listening is also a good idea for engaging with people. I think it was the softball team thing, and I totally agree with that. But also when you're talking to folks or whatever, just aggressively listen. Like, journalists are well informed, don't interject, don't give your spin, just really, really listen to what people are saying.
I don't actually have anything to add as advice to you. I have some advice for us because we've been talking a lot about why people don't trust us. Where did we lose the trust? How do we regain the trust? And I think we need to also trust you, that you are capable of changing your mind, that you are, you have it within you to research, that you have it within you to trust us back. And I think that we have also lost trust to a certain degree in each other and in our audiences, and we also need to gain that back.
Yeah, I totally echo the idea of read more, read everything, read the Star, read the Globe, read the Times. Subscribe to my Substack. I had to get that plug in there somewhere. But also become a student of the world and become a student of history. Cannot recommend this enough. Read Hannah Arendt. Read Mesha Gessen, who won and then had rescinded the Hannah Arendt Award a couple months ago. Go back and understand how people dealt with the threat of looming authoritarianism and war in the 1920s and the 1930s. Understand how other people around the world are dealing with this moment as well, because we are not alone, we are not an island, and we can learn a lot from other people.
Well, after that, what I'm about to say is just pithy, but I went home after one long grind of a week where everything happened, and I just watched 6 episodes of Selling Sunset. I just needed to turn it off. So point 1, it's okay to turn it off sometimes and then come back. And then the second thing, my advice is, download our apps and pay for a subscription because this is what we need. Journalism has to be supported or it goes away.
All of this is advice I am going to take. Believe me, that was really a great round. And I'm just going to ask Lisa Henderson to come up here and just say a few words. We've gone way over time, but you guys have been an amazing audience.
And I'll really aim to keep it short, but thanks are real, and I want to make them from the stage. My name is Lisa Henderson. I'm the privileged Dean of the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western, co-host of this event. Before I say more, I just want to hear from the students in the room. If you're a student, call out. Are there students in the room? Okay, it's really important to us that you're here. Michelle was right. We at FIMS have huge respect for CJFE and the journalists and editorial workers involved, and we appreciate the chance to work together. My sincere thanks first to our panelists. And I want to add something that sounds like a plug, but honestly, it's not. 3 of them are Western alum, and two of those alum are from FIMS. Carol, Brodie, and Nicole are Western alum. And I don't say that so that I can say something that seems just not for me to say, which is that we're so proud of you. Of course, we're proud of you. But we want to do you proud. We want to do right by you. And that's why I am here. That's why I work and FIMS works with CJFE, especially at this moment in our politically and otherwise topsy-turvy world. Support between news organizations and journalism education is essential. I'm not here to deploy journalists in the project of protecting democracy. This is something that reminds me of something Justin said. We're not here to mobilize people. Our Asper Fellow this year is Kathy Gannon, the distinguished reporter from Timmins, Ontario, who's stationed who's been headquartered for a long time in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And she's convinced me that it's not a journalist's job to protect democracy as a system. And I'm like, wow, my head is exploding to hear that. But the preservation of the conditions in which journalists can do journalism has a democratic effect. And rather than deploying journalists to protect democracy as we know it, if journalists do journalism, it is likely to have a democratic effect. That's true too of post-secondary education. And it's an effect that I'm committed to in both places. So our gratitude, in the case of journalism, I won't talk about the teachers right now, but to the reporters in the room. I think that's absolutely critical, and I know that everyone on stage will continue to be a reporter, and so I want to express my appreciation for that. Some thanks for this evening. My thanks to our project assistant, doctoral candidate at FIMS, Joan Escobar-Lamana, who has done possibly more work on this than you bargained for, Joan, with great courage and ease. Joan, it's not our first rodeo, yours and mine, but it's always a pleasure and for me a great source of admiration. Thanks to FIMS and CJFE staff, including at CJFE, Carla Rojas, who is, there you are, hi. And at FIMS, some people who are and others who aren't here tonight, Sid Hall, Sarah Irons, Becky Blue, Suzanne El Sharafa, Glenda Ogilvie, and Charlotte McClellan. At FIMS, I often say that they could own or open their own production company, but please do not. We need you. Thanks to Hot Docs manager Alicia McNutt, who is bold in a way I sincerely appreciate, and to her staff, many of them volunteers. We love Hot Docs, and we know that these are not easy times for independent arts and culture organizations. To our audience of so many concerned citizens, brilliant journalists, I should say, how many journalists and recently past journalists are there in the room? Lots of you. Yeah, woohoo! Brilliant journalists and committed student journalists, thank you for being here and for caring. This also echoes something Justin said earlier, which is we are not powerless, and I think that's really important to remember. Also speaking to, I think they may have headed, no, speaking to the question about the 13 million. We are not powerless, but we have to act on the power that we have every day, and we have to take care of each other. And with that in mind, I want to thank everyone here, panelists and audience alike, and be brave.
Thank you, everybody. Great audience. Thank you.